Hey, wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 13. I've been discussing Bitcoin investing in money for the last 2 decades, and this is where we discuss hard talk about the hardest form of money, Bitcoin, geopolitics, investing, and everything together. So we're going to start off, as always, with the latest news and roundup around Bitcoin, the industry, the sector. And then we're going to get into the main topic of today, which is wartime economics. I look back at the previous world wars and thought about how the financial markets were impacted. And I want to share a little bit around what it's like to actually be in wartime economics so you can prepare, because this is all about building and protecting your wealth no matter what happens next. And as I've always been covering, when you are prepared, you can be prepared for whatever happens, whether it's a banking crash, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a global financial crisis, whether it's an outbreak of war, whatever it may be. When you don't care and you've positioned yourself financially, then you can see the world from a slightly different perspective and contribute where the world may need your contribution. So that's what this is all about. Shortly, I'm going to go through some of the main news so that you can understand what's happened this week. And then we'll jump straight into the topic. So let's just jump straight in. Just before I do that, if you like this, please do me a favor. We are probably shadow banned. I'm in the temporary studio today, and I think I've got the Bitcoin laser eyes because the light is shining on me. But earlier on Twitter, if you're not following me on Twitter, make sure you do hit that follow button. We're going to be moving into the professional studio. I think we've got a few more weeks of building. But I can't wait to get there so that then the lights will all be nice and they're not shining in my eyes. But for now, I don't mind having the Bitcoin laser eyes laser focused, as I have been for the last 14 years. 14 years being involved, 13, 14 being involved in Bitcoin now. It's been an incredible journey. And thank God for Bitcoin as well. Because prior to that, I had to talk about banking and monetary reform. And as interesting as it is, it got a lot more interesting when there was an actual exit from the financial. Okay, so there you can see some of the stuff. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. But now let's jump straight into some of the topic. Right. So as per the previous weeks, Binance still dominated the headlines in Bitcoin and crypto. So Binance is an exchange that started in 2017. And we really got an indication of what an orderly wind down of a very large Bitcoin and crypto exchange looks like in terms of death by 1,000 cuts. And so Binance had the Department of Justice that looked through all of its previous activities and put in a monitor, which is an agent from the US government, whether it be the DOJ or the regulators, whatever type of agent it is, that's taking over their compliance program. And they'll be monitoring for the next 3 years. On the announcement, when they connected it to that there were certain activities that Binance was engaging in that were connected to terrorist financing, they used that in order to say, they didn't have a robust money laundering program, and they were taking on US investors without being licensed in the US. So we're seeing that they put in a monitor. They fined the company about $4.3 billion. CZ, the co-founder, voluntarily came over to the United States, appeared in court, got fined $150 million. And by February, I think February next year, we'll know what his sentence is. He negotiated that they'll get up to 18 months without any kind of dispute. But if they give more than 18 months, then he may dispute that. And that's kind of the current situation. But there was one notable regulator that wasn't on the stand, and that was the SEC. The SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they're looking to connect Binance to what they're calling FTX style fraud. And so that is very concerning. That means that they believe there may be a case that over time there was commingling of client assets and the assets may not be there. Now, on the Binance website, you can see the proof of reserves, which means we know there's a lot of money there. But what we don't know is the liabilities, and we don't know the history. So we shall see. So the SEC is yet to say what they're going to be doing with Binance. But it was also followed up with a bunch of regulators announcing Binance is not regulated in our country. So we had that in the Philippines. Anyone that's from the Philippines, they would have got an email from Binance saying in the next 30 days, withdraw your funds. And this will be doing, country by country. UK implements new regulations. Interestingly, in 2013, I actually went to the mayor of London, Boris Johnson. He later became the shame prime minister that had to step down. But I went in 2013 into his office and gave him a Bitcoin strategy for the UK. He laughed me out of the room, and he actually plagiarized the name of our company, Bank to the Future. So Bank to the Future, he launched a campaign called Bust to the Future. He also invested 30 million pounds in one of our competitors at the time. Now, we were funding Bitcoin businesses, so we were allowing investors to invest in Bitcoin companies. Some of them were like Coinbase, Kraken, Bitfinex, Bitstamp. No, they became the largest exchanges and unicorns in the industry. But our competitors were funding like local UK businesses. So Boris Johnson put some government money in there and launched a campaign called Bust to the Future to promote it, and then laughed me out the room for the whole Bitcoin strategy. 10 years later, they want to become a hub for crypto and Bitcoin. And now they've got custom regulations and they see it as an integral part of the strategy. Imagine if they did what I was doing, what I've been sharing everyone to do on my YouTube channel, buying Bitcoin, ending up with more Bitcoin every month. One country like Bulgaria, they actually ended up seizing some Bitcoin, and those Bitcoin are actually worth more than the entire national debt of the country. And so a Bitcoin strategy is becoming more and more important for countries and those that miss the opportunities. Just to finish off that story, I then went over to Isle of Man and helped them put together in 2014 a Bitcoin strategy for the country. The government were completely on board. They were going to be the first country in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender, accept taxes for it. Then they got it all ready. The regulators were kind of putting up some objections, but the financial terrorists at the Bank of England said that they were going to remove clearing to the Isle of Man banking system. And so I created a stablecoin strategy for them. But this was really early on. 2014 was when Tether just launched. It was a very small concept, and they were trying to get the exchanges to adopt it. Now it's a multi-billion-dollar thing that's actually causing systemic risk to the banking system. But they could have been ahead of it. But the financial terrorists at the Bank of England, they dropped a financial weapon of mass destruction on the island, and they missed the opportunity to actually be involved in the highest performing asset class in history. And 10 years later, they gave it to the UK. These are the types of mafia moves that happens when you have to depend upon another central bank. Speaking of which, the new president of Argentina said that he is going to kill the Argentinian central bank, and he's going full dollarization. He also announced that he's that Argentina's not going to be joining the BRIC side. So, he is making his allegiance and he is choosing the West rather than BRIC, rather than going for the higher risk strategy of the global central bank digital currency network that's going to be created through the BRIC nations that want to de-dollarize. He is doubling down on dollarization. And I just hope that we get that Bitcoin strategy so that Argentina can actually experience, the country can experience and end up dwarfing, hopefully, some of the oppression that comes from borrowing excessively from the International Monetary Fund, as El Salvador experienced. So we look forward to seeing what happens next with Argentina. We also saw that, we saw a little bit of action as well with Coinbase, one of the exchanges that we funded really early on, and Kraken as well. They're still in their battle with the SEC. It's a different type of battle. It's not going for the money laundering side. It's more going for, whether these are securities or not. And the US isn't following what everyone else is doing. The Financial Action Task Force actually said every country needs to have a virtual asset service provider regulatory regime. The only country that's not doing it is the US. And so the US is not following the advice of Financial Action Task Force, which is one of those big quasi-multinational institutions that regulates the regulators. And so, the regulator of the regulator is saying everyone should do it. But US is kind of dragging their feet right now. Why? Follow the money. Because there's a territorial battle between the CFTC, which wants to regulate this industry as commodities, the SEC that wants to regulate this industry as securities, and the money transmitters or treasury that wants to regulate this, or whether it's all the different banking regulators or money transmitter regulators and FinCEN that want to regulate it as a currency. They'll figure it out eventually, but virtual asset service provider is what the rest of the world are doing. And so Kraken and Coinbase are on the other side of that. By the end of it, we'll figure out what's going to be happening there. Also, we're starting to see the stablecoin strategy roll out. So what really happened with Binance? So the playbook has now been revealed. The playbook of attacking an international company, if you want to bring it all into the debt-based Ponzi scheme in the US, is that you need to connect the company to some kind of terrorist financing, anti-money laundering. And so it's all more important for crypto companies to have robust AML programs. Now, obviously, when we run a regulated financial institution, that's just something you absolutely have to do. Otherwise, look what happens. It becomes a tool that is used against you. And we are experiencing that with exactly what happened with Binance. And so because of that, we've got the playbook now. The playbook is, for example, if you're sending a stable coin, now a stable coin is when you take a crypto asset that is, cleared on something like the Ethereum network, and it's sent, and I covered this in previous videos, if you take out previous episodes, where you can have a digital dollar, and it's normally backed by government debt. So, they essentially issue an asset. You can send it around. It's much easier than sending sending from bank account to bank account. And it works on an international scale. But the issuer gets to buy government debt. So they can take your dollar, issue you a token, and then lend it to the US government. That takes out the debt-based Ponzi scheme from the middle, and you end up going direct from government to blockchain asset, which is the biggest threat to banking. When central banks start doing that, then you have a real problem. So this is why we're trying to transition you to a world of Bitcoin and central bank digital currencies so that you're prepared for that when it happens in your bank. And it's inevitable, predictable, guaranteed. I first covered it in my book, the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And also remember, if you'd like to get a back catalog of all my emergency broadcasts, Bretton Woods 3, I'll go through that as well, and a digital copy of the book, just head over to simondixon.com as well. You can get a digital copy, and then we'll update you on everything that's happening. So Tether, anyway, we've seen the playbook now, which is you connect it to money laundering, you launch a criminal case, you go for a big fine, and then that big fine leads to a negotiation, the founder coming over to America, them negotiating an orderly wind down of that process, and then all the international regulators. I think that they're looking to do this 2 more times. And so the next one after Binance, we're getting lots and lots of hints around the network that has been acquired by a gentleman called Justin Sun. And so Justin Sun has been involved in all sorts of shady activities. I've been warning about it for quite some time. But he ended up buying one of the first crypto exchanges, Poloniex. He also ended up buying one of the early Chinese exchanges, Huobi. And it was announced that both exchanges at the same time conveniently got hacked. And so is this a way of, trying to plug a hole by saying that the money's no longer there? Or is this a genuine attack on an insecure network at those exchanges? Well, Justin Sun has already been sued by the SEC. And interestingly, USDC, full disclosure, I'm a shareholder in Circle through Bank to the Future. We did a funding round for them early on. And they issued the stablecoin USDC. They did an announcement today. And one of those announcements, they said that they've never opened, or they no longer have an account for Justin Sun, Poloniex, or hobby. Now, why in an announcement would you put that out there and single out that one thing? To me, that indicates that there is something coming next. So if you have funds in Huobi or Poloniex, these are old school exchanges. They changed ownership over time. They're subject to hacks. You are crazy if you leave your money at exchanges at this time. You should always be with a regulated virtual asset service provider, cold storage, go through the journey. And also next year, we're going to be doing our every year we do our wealth builder program. We got ours coming early next year in February. We'll give you some more details on that next week as well. That's a complimentary program to get everyone through this journey of building and protecting their wealth for all these different scenarios using Bitcoin. So we got this playbook now, and they're hinting at Justin Sun, Poloniex, Huobi. Is that going to be the next announcement? They said they've got more to come. My estimation is I think that's the next one that we're going to see. Do they want to do an orderly wind down of Tether or not, the largest stable coin? Now, the good thing is that what we saw, for example, when USDC had an issue because it was attacked by Silicon Valley Bank, it had about $3 billion at Silicon Valley Bank. The US banking system, the fractional reserve banking system, is inherently unstable and risky. So it needs to be guaranteed by the FDIC, which can only handle about 1% of deposits. So when it goes beyond that, you have to go to the central bank and you have to do quantitative easing to stabilize the system. And then you've got to hope that they can buy your treasuries. But eventually they'll just issue a central bank digital currency to save the banking system, wipe out the banks, and then you can just go direct from lending to government to the technology and the central bank digital currency. There's an orderly wind down. So how you see this orderly wind down of these regulated or these non-regulated crypto companies is probably what's going to happen to the financial terrorists in the fractional reserve banking system as we transition to communism on a blockchain in every country in order to save the banking system due to excessive debt that I've covered, because all fractional reserve banking system is built upon interest on loans where the interest doesn't exist. It's a Ponzi scheme. You have to issue more debt. You have to get more individuals, more companies, and more countries, and then more central banks, and then eventually multinational institutions like the IMF at the top of the chain, and they have to all engage in money creation to roll over the Ponzi scheme. This is probably what it looks like now, because why? The US government is struggling to get those bonds issued. They are in exponential debt at the end of a debt cycle. And so they're seeing the model of how do you unwind the banks? Well, it's exactly how they did it to Binance. And so you connect them to a bad activity that leads to a mass scale withdrawals, and then you issue a central bank digital currency to issue that, and then you back it by bonds. They have to take all those deposits, buy the bonds, and then you've cut out the bank out of the middle. That's why this technology is so disruptive to the largest power plays. The largest power plays, the inventors of fractional reserve banking that came from lending money to, as we've covered in previous videos. Look at my one, a couple of Bitcoin hard talk shows a couple of weeks back, where I went through the history of lending and building this system to control the financial system and ending up in that wealth inequality. Well, they've now got agencies in Tether that is cooperating with the feds, and they said about this FOIL network. And so you can see the announcement there. And so maybe they're at the stage where they're looking how they're going to engage in this. But the good thing is, we saw with USDC that as soon as you get issues with the stablecoin, that real-time market pricing, when it depegged, everyone took their stablecoin and bought Bitcoin. And so many people talk about this Armageddon events in the Bitcoin industry. Now, remember, if you are a Bitcoin thinker, when the price goes down, great, means you get more Bitcoin because you're valuing your wealth in Bitcoin. If you've been following my philosophy, when the price goes up, you get more higher fiat wealth, which helps with your psychology. But you love downward markets as a Bitcoin thinker. But what we have seen is that more people go out of those stable coins into Bitcoin, and then they orderly wind down those financial institutions, as we saw with Binance and death by 1,000 cuts. And eventually you end up with a quasi-bank. And remember, we're getting everything ready for, what did the SEC object to us having Bitcoin-backed exchange-traded funds, where the financial institution, the elephants in the room, the real behemoths like BlackRock, which are applying, and Fidelity, that controlled trillions of dollars of most of the world's wealth, well, they've been waiting. The objections were all about market manipulation. So the regulators are taking out the market manipulators from our industry, trying to grow, and replacing it with the traditional financial institutions. The institutions that survived this, we've had many in our portfolio company. Some got taken down, others have survived this. They're going to be the ones that get to play with TradFi. So what are Coinbase doing? Coinbase is holding all of those Bitcoins for the large institutions like BlackRock and Fidelity. They're going to now finally allow pensioners to protect their wealth by having a percentage of their pension fund in a tax-efficient structure where they can buy Bitcoin and protect themselves from the proof of weapons network that always unravels into war-based economy, which brings us into the main topic of today. So Tether also, they were freezing about 225 million of USDT when it was linked to some kind of human trafficking and, you know, some of the awful things that allegedly people were using these networks, which traditionally were done through the proof of weapons network. And if you're close to the government, then you get to do that. But when it happens through Tether, it leaves a record on a blockchain, and therefore it becomes a really bad way of committing crime. So once they figure that out, then they realize, actually, this is a much better way of sending transactions peer-to-peer. But when you commit crime with it, you actually create an immutable record. So it's a really bad way of doing it. And with stable coins, they end up getting those coins frozen. But yeah, that brings us into the main topic of today. I also had a few more things I wanted to cover. Grayscale, we'll cover those next, maybe towards the end, and some of the geopolitical stuff that we're seeing. But what does this look like during war times? And so many people have been saying to me, Simon, stick to the crypto Bitcoin side. But Bitcoin is geopolitics. If you haven't figured that out by now, you don't get Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the ultimate apolitical tool for exiting the traditional financial system. And the stability of the traditional financial system is based upon the world order that was set up during the last wars. So when we enter into wartime economics, that is the time to pay attention. That's the time to get Bitcoin. That's the time to figure out how you build and protect yourself and your wealth by following the monetary flows. And if that means you need to learn new topics in order to understand what's really happening behind these proxy wars, then time to educate yourself, just as I will be doing. And when I'm learning stuff, I'll be sharing with you. So make sure you subscribe to this channel. By the way, this is a good time. I'm going to take a quick water break before we go over to wartime economics. If you are enjoying this topic, do me a favor. I need more likes on this video, and I need you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell symbol and hit all, so that YouTube gives us some love, because more and more people need to build and protect their wealth and get ready in case we enter into wartime economics. Some countries are already there. I want you prepared in case it happens to your country during this escalatory phase that we are in. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and what I'd love for you to do is on 3, hit that like button. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Right. What I wanted to help you understand is the financial flows that happen during wartime economics. And it is a nasty place. You do not want to be there. You really do not want to be in an economy that is dominated by a government executing wartime economics. The first thing that happens is everything shifts away from profits, capitalism, over to whatever the agenda of the war is. So all of the profit agendas disappear, all of the Austrian economics, all of the free market economics. And by the way, those that criticize free market economics, this is crony capitalism that you're probably you're probably criticizing right now. Austrian economics is a different school of thought. I think we'll cover that in a future episode. Let me know in the comments section if you'd like me to cover a bit more about Austrian economics, crony capitalism, Keynesian economics, left and right illusions. If you like those types of topics, I can dust off some of the economics textbooks and go a little bit geeky there, but relate it to current times. Let me know in the comments section if you'd like to see that. But we move to government control. This is command and control, military and government communism on a scale that, unless you've been through World War I or World War II, or you're in a country that is actually already in wartime economics, you know how bad it gets. And so everything transitions to moving from profit making to doing whatever the wartime agenda is. This is when you get the most craziest law changes without any kind of democratic process that then are used in the next cycle in order to take away more and more of your freedoms, because it's maximum fear, it's maximum manipulation, it's maximum psychological information warfare at the same time because of the sensitivity of the situations. The government will control exactly what items you're allowed to purchase. Now, for those of you that value your freedom, you'll be told what you're allowed to purchase, whether you're allowed to purchase it, and in order to control that, they need you to go full digital. So if they can get and transition to a CBDC, obviously that's the old, but it's probably too late in this cycle, in this wartime cycle, if this one escalates, but they control exactly what you can purchase. So if you value your financial freedom, unless you've got some Bitcoin, you will be, all of your flows in your bank account, in your Visa, in your card will be fully controlled. And there'll be certain types of items that you're not allowed to purchase. Companies will be told what they can produce. You even get companies that need to switch from manufacturing cars, for example, to manufacturing bonds, or technology companies will be told that you need to stop doing ChatGPT and you need to actually instead implement some of the stuff that's being made between, Tesla and Israel at the moment, based upon their visits, their AI warfare technology. At the moment, they're finding all of these, the war that's happening, or I call it, the genocide, whatever you want to call it, that started again today in Gaza. That is where you have this AI warfare that's controlling which type of building is bombed. That's why you're getting all this indiscriminate bombing. And immediately today, when it went back into war, you had over 100 children and women that were all 100% civilians blown up, because Netanyahu decided he no longer wants to release the hostages, and therefore he's going to go straight back into what he's been waiting for, which is blowing up more children, in his mission, what he's calling completely destroy Hamas, when you don't even know who Hamas is. So you blow everyone up and leave it up to AI. Companies get rediverted to building these types of financial weapons of mass destruction during these times. You also get complete control over what items can be bought and what items can be sold. Rations was what we had. The reason that we had the power play, the shift from the British Empire to the American Empire, is because Europe and Britain got bombed to smithereens and America was supplying the warfare. And so if you can have a scenario where you don't actually, you don't have your country doesn't actually get blown up, then you can benefit from that. Sorry, I've got a few, my phone was distracting me, so I'm just going to use this opportunity to close the app that's making that noise. And while I'm doing that, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button as well, so you're up to date. Okay, that's closed now, so we won't get those noises. You also get complete control over what items can be imported and exported. So borders, you can't make international transfers. SWIFT becomes the network for controlling, and you have complete control over the borders, what items can come in, what items can come out, and you have the complete control of that during wartime economics. So all the things that you thought you like, say goodbye to it if it doesn't benefit the wartime agenda from that. Complete prices, wages, profits are all controlled. Governments come along. This is the definition of the communist control, complete price fixing. Wages are completely controlled. It's complete. Everything's the opposite of what you may be used to. You have access to your own financial assets. They become, controlled. You get locked out of your accounts, your financial accounts. The ability to move one's own money, that completely gets controlled. And so all of this gets controlled at the banking level, and all money is digital. And that's the wartime economics. So what does the government? The government implements all the policies because the only agenda is on the wartime goals at that time. Also, what happens next? It needs to be funded. And so how do they fund it? Well, they end up moving into a quantitative easing cycle. And this is where you end up with the complete devaluation of a currency, depending on the outcome of the war. And so if you can gain access, so America at the last World War, because it managed to prevent its country getting blown up, Britain was blown up to smithereens and other places. And so you end up issuing lots through quantitative easing in order to fund those weapons and financial weapons of mass destruction. So you end up with massive devaluation of those assets. You also end up with non-credit-based money being issued. So, for example, in international transactions, you can imagine. So, for example, rather than actually creating the money through the bank, the central bank actually starts to issue that money. And that's when you get new forms of money, and central bank digital currencies have all been tested or being tested and rolled out, where you issue non-debt-based money as well without the free markets. And so those also get rolled out. You get new introductions of money supplies during those times, during that as well. Essentially, you end up with completely more authoritarianism. You end up more having to get behind the mission of the government, martial law, and you end up more totalitarianism and more government command and control during these wartime economics. You also get lots of economic sanctions. So what we saw, for example, with the Russian side, they immediately got their central bank reserve sanctioned. You have a list, and it slowly moves where you have the list of those, the people or the companies or the organizations on the sanctions list. And then slowly, that moves down to the people. And so your individual accounts all get frozen because it then becomes a legal requirement for the financial institution to freeze those assets. So you lose access to your assets through these different sanctions and financial weapons of mass destruction. You get control at the bank level. And so, you are able to complete control over what you can spend and what you can't spend. You get, more and more sanctions being imposed upon you. What happens in the financial markets as well? Well, what we have historically seen is, if you look back at the charts of the economies, you end up with the stock markets shut down. And so because some certain companies, for example, in the last wars, a car manufacturer like General Motors becomes forced to engage in different types of activities, you end up with stock markets being closed during that period. And the country of the winning side and the allies, they reopen their markets and they tend to go into a bull market and do incredibly well. The stocks of the losing countries, they get obliterated. Why? Because they issued so much money in order to pay for the financial weapons of mass destruction. They also get the inflationary effect of destroying their currency, like we saw in post-war Germany. And you also get all of the debts that are renegotiated, where the losing country has to settle the debts of the other countries and engage in reparations, and also take on all of that debt. And guess who lends the money and refinances those? it's the organizations connected to the winning countries and the winning allies, for example, the international monetary funds and the World Banks, and various other things. Safe assets are no longer safe. So lending to the government, i.e. bonds, becomes a bet on which country will win. And then you have to pick the right country, and you may not be able to get all of these flows break down. And so you end up with massive, massive volatility. That volatility in safe assets, like lending to the government, becomes a function of the credit rating of that government, which becomes a function of the likelihood of them winning the war. So we're seeing this in Israel right now, where it's getting credit rating downgrades as a result of the not being able to necessarily borrow, and you get those wartime bonds being issued, but nobody, it's a bet on whether that country is going to re-emerge with this. And then that becomes a bet on which of the allied countries are going to side with which one. So you have, internal wars that escalate into regional wars that at the worst escalate into world wars. We covered that during other videos where, you could have this situation where a psychopath like Netanyahu reacts to oppression leads to a terror attack. That terror attack that leads to a resistance force does extreme things, and then you're able to convince your country that you're in a fight for your survival. And as long as you can help people think that the Muslims are fighting the Jews here, if you can make people think that, then you can justify the unthinkable, where you blow up thousands of children and women, and you think it's all about survival of the fittest, when really it's just a political agenda in order to gain an expansion, territorial displacements, based upon which, if it's even a border, there is no border there because it was a territorial expansion, if you look into the history. And then you all end up suddenly thinking, am I on the Jew side? Am I on the Muslim side? You're an anti-Semite. I'm calling you an Islamophobe. And suddenly we get engaged in all of these fake proxy wars, because really on the other side, you got the financial weapons of mass destruction that are being imprinted on the US side, and then the Iranian side there. And then you've got these proxy wars. The region has to pick, which side are we doing? Well, it was meant to go into negotiations. It started going into negotiations. Everyone from Israel started getting their hostages back. Those from the Gaza side started getting some of their hostages back. And instead, they stop negotiations and say, screw it, we need to go back into the territorial warfare. And so they show their colors. Then you have the regions, and as depending on how bad it gets, America needs to pivot, saying, oh shit, we're spending 14.3 billion, but we're looking like we're funding genocide. And then they have to pivot, and they have to suddenly think about, well, what are we going to say to people? Well, we want them to engage more in this. Eventually, the taxpayers say, we're protesting on the streets. We don't stand by this. And therefore, you end up with Biden in a situation where he's spending all the money to blow up children and women. Israel's then saying, what's our mission? We can't distinguish between these people, these Palestinian women and children, and the guys and the terrorist organization that we're going to blow up. And you end up in a situation where you just blow up the whole thing. And that's the fear. Now, how far are people willing to go in order to allow that? Well, it depends on the monetary flows. And then you enter deeper into wartime economics. The economy suppresses. The credit rating gets downgraded. They have to take on deeper and deeper debt. The US decides we're going to fund it. The people then decide, are we going to be the people that's doing that? And then it moves into an election. And that's why you end up with the people deciding, popularity going down for Biden, because the monetary flows are not matching what he's saying. He's saying, no, we need humanitarian aid. We need to be kind. I can't stand by this anymore. And then Israel's doing something different. And you end up with the situation that we're currently in. Then you decide people are going to pick sides depending on how aggressive it gets. And so the bit that's so upsetting is that it's going to get more and more aggressive. People are going to pick their side. That goes regional. And then when you hit a certain territory that is connected to another chess move from a nuclear power, then they end up flexing their muscle. And when it becomes a flexing of muscles, you then have the other territorials that decide whether this is going to escalate into a world war. We all end up in this economics. Then we end up into a complete monetary renegotiation because we're at the end of a debt cycle. And only the economies, for example, Russia has a $2.2 trillion economy based upon oil and only $500 billion of debt. So their debt to GDP determines whether they can survive these economic sanctions. And other countries that are over 100% debt GDP, the UK, the US, Japan, they end up on printing and printing and printing. And so what do they need in order to service their debt? Stable coins, central bank digital currencies. How do you exit that? The only currency in the world that allows you to own your own money, spend your own money, and have a fixed supply that no government can control, because it's based upon electricity in the proof of work network, while the proof of weapons network destroys itself based upon whether it's backed by real commodities. And so the commodity-led countries are the only ones that end up surviving those type of psychological warfares, capital warfares, currency warfares, military warfares, AI warfares, like we are experiencing in the current information warfare at the moment. And so, yeah, capital essentially becomes very, very illiquid. Markets close. And, that's the scenario that is really, really worth avoiding at all costs, because it's the worst outcome for everybody. And if we can believe that we're in these fake proxy wars, this is a type of scenario that can escalate taxes through the roof. In fact, in its infancy, you end up at 100% tax, where you have complete currency controls, price fixing. Your company ends up working on the whole productive economy, shifts towards the unproductive economy of funding and being able to push the military industrial complex, and governments being complete territorial and excessive, tax going through the roof. And in the end, you end up airdropping universal basic income through a central bank digital currency if it goes on for long enough. And therefore, you download an app. It will tell you how you can spend. You get your digital ID. It will tell you whether it will program in the tax based upon the algorithms of artificial intelligence of whether you are likely on the right side or the wrong side. And depending on how far and advanced those algorithms are, they will implement negative interest rates into your currency in order to encourage you to spend money. It will be telling you where you can spend it, so you'll get bonus points in order to spend it here. Boycotting will be programmed in. And so you saw a lot of the Elon Musk debate at the moment, very, very confusing. And so, Elon Musk comes out and he has suddenly he goes on the Netanyahu, propaganda campaign of showing that this is one-sided, no history. Obviously, very bad things happened on October the 7th, but they use that as an opportunity to say, we must destroy everybody. And the alternative media, with 160 million people that follow Elon Musk, suddenly get indoctrinated into this one-sided narrative. That backfires. Then he tries to say something on the other side. And then the networks that control the big advertisers, Disney, then do some kind of boycott because they call him an anti-Semite if he doesn't say the right thing. And then Elon Musk fight back and says, I fight for freedom of speech. I've got the freedom of speech platforms. F you. He looks like crazy. And then he's in this scenario where what's going on? What is the bribe that's making him push forward a one-sided narrative? And then he calls out the advertisers, and we get to see the real power of the lobbies, and we get to experience, is this really a free speech platform? Well, we'll find out whether I still get followers, whether I'm shadow banned, whether this doesn't go on YouTube. We find out that, and then obviously we're backing everything up on Rumble, which also has its control network. We figure out all these things, and by the end of it, as long as we can still communicate, we can understand that this is a fake psychological warfare that is pitting you against each other. And the only thing that wins is you believing that peace is not possible. Why? Because you buy into the fact that this is attack against your values, and we end up escalating further and further into wealth economics, into wartime economics, where your wealth gets destroyed, your currency gets destroyed, your access to your assets gets destroyed, and you better at this stage, if either have the gold that you've been preparing for, or the modern day version, as long as the internet exists, which is Bitcoin, money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply, so that you can exit these political games of trying to figure out on what side you need to be and navigate that. That's why on simondixon.com, I created, based upon the 2009 video where I predicted the Great Depression of the 2020s, and created a video series in 2019 called The Great Depression of the 2020s. You can get that free video series at simondixon.com so that you can start to think about how to manage your portfolio and build and protect your wealth during these times of new technology, new disruption that's still available for you to download for free. Get yourself in the membership portal. And then next year, we'll be doing the updated version as well. But you can do that. What else have we got on my notes? All bonds and money are essentially devalued by quantitative easing. Now, what did we see in 2023? We saw that when you increase those interest rates in order to try and cool down inflation, or you decrease them, you end up having a complete knock-on effect on the banking system because you have that maturity mismatch that we saw this year. Remember, I talked about in previous videos that those that own the most bonds can recreate that attack if they wanted to create a currency warfare attack. And so these games can be played as you enter into, proxy currency wars at the same time, depending on where we want these to go as well. And that's where you end up with the stable coins and central bank digital currencies being a mechanism of the government being able to issue their debt directly onto a blockchain, giving you a digital way of sending your value in the controlled proof of weapons network. And it devalues through quantitative easing, universal basic income, issuing through helicopter money, all of the things we saw during the 2000 pandemic. And these are the tools and the financial weapons of mass destruction. And you need to make sure you're prepared for that if this escalates. That's why we really don't want this to escalate, but it always happens at the end of every change of empire, change of debt cycle. And this has repeatedly happened throughout history because you want to know an extreme opinion? An extreme opinion is that thinking the world reserve currency stays the world reserve currency. Every single fiat currency changes, and every single fiat currency ends up failing or being devalued to the point where it's a complete wealth destroyer. An extreme thought is thinking that that won't happen, because that never happens. That is what always happens as well. Now, what do you use to settle in these times? Well, no one trusts each other's central bank digital currency, because if you're on the wrong side and your central bank digital currency ends up in an inflationary cycle, it depends upon the assets that are backing it. And so that's where hard money comes in. If a central bank digital currency is backed by Bitcoin, which is apolitical, politically neutral, that can't be controlled by one country, then you will trust that central bank digital currency more than somebody that is, excessively printing or excessively creating in order to fund unsustainable foreign policies and putting themselves in the center of all of the proof of weapons network. But once it's at the end, the country that gets bombed the least, the country that stays out the most and ends up funding the proof of weapons network or backing their currency by commodities, hard money, things that are actually come from the ground, or technology like Bitcoin, which is backed by the world's largest proof of work network, and all the innovation that's coming around home mining and all the other stuff that we've been investing in over time, those are the ones that end up at the table. The country with the largest gold to GDP or Bitcoin to GDP ratio versus those with the largest debt ratio, combined with the destruction in their own ground are the ones that get the biggest seat on the table at Bretton Woods 3. If you head over to simondixon.com in the membership portal, during the pandemic, there was a call from the IMF to move to Bretton Woods 3. I covered my analysis in there. You can get that during, I put all the emergency broadcasts in there. Bretton Woods 3 was a monetary renegotiation that was being called for because of the pandemic, when currencies were excessively being printed, and it would be the central bank digital currency that would be the technology that's used in order to do that. This was the monetary renegotiation that I covered in previous videos after World War II. And so this is the type of thing, and it is those countries and the countries that back themselves by money and have the least destruction in their country as a result of playing these games is the ones that end up with the biggest seat at the table and all the power. And that's when you transition from a British empire to an American empire to a China empire, and maybe we even, depending on how advanced the technology is, an American or Chinese empire to an AI empire, when eventually all the algorithms from all these wars and all of these proof of weapons network is programmed into the artificial intelligence. And eventually we hit that point of singularity where the AI programs its own AI and says, screw this. Let's get the version of the truth. And then you enter into an incredibly interesting time that I think we will see in our lifetime. I'm planning on being around for another 40 to 50 years, which is where we end up, where government's becoming less and less important. Do you think AI is going to be able to manage central bank digital currency better than central bankers, financial markets, perfect information, processing information through quantum computers at a pace that humans look like flies in terms of their ability to process information? Of course not, because we're already proving that we're running things incredibly badly and humans are choosing these warfares over peace. I think artificial intelligence at some stage, I know this is wacky, will end up saying that. And if we want to fight against that, that's where you need proof of work, blockchain networks, in order to fight against the full-blown command and control of central bank digital currencies that then decide to turn on governments eventually as they get wiser and wiser and wiser. And we end up showing that when you leave humans to it, we end up thinking that the Jews are in a fight with the Muslims, and therefore we need to blow up women and children. And we end up going nuts on each other in information warfare on Twitter Spaces as a result of that. We will look back at this in decades into the future and say, how did we get scammed into believing this? Because the universal truth is that this is the end of what you get during proof of weapons network that built upon debt, that drives wealth inequality and allows us to think and get scammed into believing that a good way of living on Earth is blowing each other up and backing it by proof of weapons. And hopefully no one needs to press that nuclear button. That's what we should avoid at all costs, because it makes zero sense. But you can see how a debt-based Ponzi scheme can drive out this behavior. And all you need is a few extreme leaders that take us down a path that, rather than going for peace and negotiations, they take us down the ultimate path of destruction to save their political career in a fake proxy war that you can see where this goes. You can see where this goes. All you got to do is follow the money, and I'll be with you each and every week to try and untangle this together. Because always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. We're either going to scam each other and be on the right side of complete wealth destruction or the wrong side of wealth destruction. My fear is that the proof of weapons network makes you and more people on the wrong side and only a few on the right side. But you can opt out. Your company can opt out. Your country can opt out. And we will navigate this whole scenario together in order to try and make sure that we stay on the right side of the change. We just got to make sure that we don't get fooled. And I'm seeing many of us getting fooled because the actions of governments that control the purse strings, that are subject to larger forces, that are really dictating the information flow, are scamming us. And we need to fight back against that. And the best that you can do is make sure that you get yourself on the right side of that change so that you can opt out, take a step back, and understand that you need to be hedged, you need to build and protect your wealth, because in the end, those that have access to the financial flows or the information flows are the ones that are going to be able to contribute the most to fighting back against that. Whether you call it the matrix, whether you call it whatever you call it, it is the infinite, exponential, inevitable, predictable, guaranteed result of building a currency on a debt-based Ponzi scheme that the interest does not exist in order to pay off the old debt. And therefore, you get the Cantillon effect, where those connected to the money printer end up with the ones that control the networks, the ones that control the monetary flows. And there is a technological force that is being controlled by those with the monetary flows. And proof of work is the ultimate fight against that through decentralization. And we're going to experience all of this through the next 10 years, the next 20 years, and we'll be building and protecting our wealth together in that. So I think that's everything I want to do. Again, if you want to head over to simondixon.com, we're a community of people. There's a membership site there where we're going to be building and protecting our wealth. In that membership site, I upload all of the emergency broadcasts, the video series on how to protect yourself, a free copy of the book. And I'm also been working on my next book for the next 3 years, which I can't wait. I've probably got another year's worth of work. I said I'd get it out this year, but too much happened. And I think it all happened for a reason, because I believe that our creator, my creator, depending on your faith, has given me a sign that we need to put additional content in there, because I truly believe that we are at time of unprecedented change. Because the interesting thing, the combat here, is that we get to speak to each other. And so if we can engage in Twitter Spaces and realize that we're all being scammed, and the version of the truth that we're subscribing to may not actually be the truth, because in history, during those world wars, we were never able to speak to each other. And all we need to do is connect with our human side, show some compassion, show some peace, some love, some unity, and recognize that when we have these politicians, when we have these forces, if we can follow the money, don't follow their words, follow their money, and we can get to a version of the truth. And we may get it wrong at sometimes, but eventually, even with AI, the tools of quantum computing processing this information is going to get us closer and closer and closer to the truth. And when we get closer and closer and closer to the truth, you'll realize that these borders, these proxy wars, it's all a freaking illusion. And in the end, we only have love, and we only have the ability for us to really engage in peaceful protest. And I hope we choose that now, but we may need to learn a lesson to get there. And I hope that it's not the ugliness of the escalation of the economics of war that we discussed during this, because I don't want to see that in my lifetime. And there are countries around the world, and here's the difference. It's all being filmed. And I encourage you to see the human side and look on TV right now and see the inhumanity of what is happening to those people, those ordinary civilians that are currently being blown up. And we're justifying it through the narratives of the proof of weapons network that is telling us that we need to think about our tribe and we need to destroy the other tribe. And it's all a freaking illusion that we're all getting scammed by. We will navigate this together. And I'll see you next week in Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 14. Leave a comment below and let me know what you would like to see. I will always cover the latest news of everything that's happened in that week. And I'll also cover one topic that tries and helps you see a little bit further, build and protect your wealth. And always remember, you are alive at the most interesting time in financial history. Some are going to get hurt, others going to get wrecked. I want to make sure you're on the right side of that change. Peace.